Imagine walking into a fancy five-star restaurant where the chandeliers sparkle like diamonds, the air smells of roasted steak and fresh bread, and every table is filled with people who think they're better than you. Now, imagine seeing a boy, no older than 15, sitting quietly beside his father, a man every newspaper calls a billionaire. But instead of admiration or respect, the crowd's reaction was cruel laughter. Friends, before we go deeper into this story, if it already grabs your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel because stories like this will make you see the world in a whole new way. Now let's dive in. The boy's name was Ethan. He had soft brown eyes that carried a kind of silence you could almost touch. Ethan was deaf from birth. To him, the world was a painting without sound. While his father, Richard Grant, owned skyscrapers, tech companies, and more money than most people could imagine, none of it could buy his son the ability to hear. Tonight was supposed to be a special evening. Richard brought Ethan to one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city to celebrate his birthday. The boy had dressed in his best suit, hair neatly combed, and a shy smile playing on his lips. But not everyone in the restaurant saw him as the treasure he was. At the table across, a group of wealthy young men and women were whispering, giggling, and covering their mouths as Ethan tried to order his food using sign language. They exaggerated his hand movements, mocked the way his fingers moved, and laughed loudly when the waiter didn't understand him right away. Even some strangers sitting nearby smirked, shaking their heads as though Ethan was some kind of joke. The cruel laughter grew louder, like a poisonous wave spreading through the room. And Richard, though powerful and feared in the business world, froze. His heart sank. He wanted to defend his son, but for the first time in his life, the billionaire felt powerless, ashamed, and helpless in front of his child's pain. Ethan noticed it all. Even though he couldn't hear the mocking words, he saw the faces, the laughter, the cruel hands imitating him. His shoulders slumped, and he lowered his head, fighting the sting of tears. For a boy who already felt different from the world, the humiliation cut deep. It wasn't just laughter, it was a message that he didn't belong. Then, just when the cruelty seemed unbearable, someone unexpected stepped forward. A waitress, no older than 22, with tired eyes and an apron smudged from a long shift, placed down her tray and walked straight to Ethan's table. Her name was Mia. She looked at the boy, smiled gently, and to everyone's shock, she began to sign. Perfectly. Slowly. Tenderly. "Happy birthday, Ethan," she signed with her hands, her fingers moving gracefully. The boy's eyes widened, his sadness melting into surprise. He looked at her in disbelief, then his face broke into the purest smile. She had spoken his language. His language. The restaurant went silent. The laughter stopped instantly, as if someone had pressed a mute button on their cruelty. All eyes were on Mia, the waitress who dared to interrupt the mockery. She continued, telling Ethan through sign language how brave and amazing he was, how special tonight should be, and how lucky the world was to have someone like him. For the first time that evening, Ethan sat up straight, his smile returning, his eyes glowing with pride. Richard stared at Mia, his throat tightening. A billionaire who thought he'd seen it all now realized he had underestimated the value of simple kindness. His empire, his billions, all the power he had, none of it had given his son the dignity this waitress restored with just her hands. The cruel group who had been mocking Ethan grew red-faced, shrinking in their chairs, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The silence they had been forced into wasn't because of anger or threats. It was because Mia's act of humanity revealed the smallness of their cruelty. The whole restaurant felt it. A hush of shame and reflection hung in the air. The boy they mocked had become the bravest person in the room. Mia finished signing to Ethan, and he signed back, "Thank you." His hands trembled with emotion, but his face was glowing. Richard stood, pulled Mia aside, and whispered, "You have no idea what you've done tonight." But she only smiled and said, "Sir, your son doesn't need pity. He just needs people to see him as he is." That night, Richard offered Mia anything she wanted, money, a new job, even a scholarship if she wanted to study further. But Mia politely declined at first, saying, "I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because kindness is free." Yet Richard wouldn't take no for an answer. Over time, Mia became not just a waitress but Ethan's sign language tutor, his friend, and eventually part of the family's closest circle. She helped Ethan step out of the shadows, to express himself proudly in a world that too often failed to listen to the silence of his hands. The story didn't end there. Ethan went on to start a foundation for children with hearing disabilities, funded by his father but inspired by the courage of one waitress who refused to stand by. Together, they built schools, programs, and platforms that gave thousands of children a voice, without sound but with dignity. And every time Ethan walked onto a stage, standing tall with his father beside him and Mia cheering in the